Prince's hand trembled as he raised it to knock. Midnight. A stranger's door. A woman inside who had no idea who he was. 8 months ago, he'd watched her father die in the 10th row of his concert, during Purple Rain, while 70,000 people kept singing. And tonight, Prince had come to tell her something about her father that she never knew. Rebecca opened the door to see a man in a purple coat. She didn't recognize him, didn't listen to his music. But 8 months earlier, her dying father had dragged her to a Prince concert, spent his last savings on tickets. And during Purple Rain, his heart stopped. She'd run, left him with paramedics, never said goodbye. Now Prince was standing on her doorstep. And what he was about to reveal about her father's final moments would shatter everything she thought she knew about that night. Before we continue with this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel. We bring you untold stories like this every week, stories that reveal the human side of legends. Hit that subscribe button now. The concert had been March 15th at the Target Center. Prince had been performing for over 2 decades, but he'd never lost his awareness of individual faces in massive crowds. That night, he noticed the man in row 10, seat 17. The man was in his 70s, thin from illness, but radiating pure joy. He wasn't just listening. He was living inside the music, eyes closed, tears streaming. The kind of transcendence that reminded Prince why he performed. Next to him sat a younger woman, clearly a caretaker. Prince recognized that exhausted devotion, the weight of counting down final moments. As Purple Rain began, the old man stood with effort, closed his eyes, raised both hands. Something shifted in his face. The worry lines smoothed, labored breathing calmed. For 4 minutes and 23 seconds, he wasn't dying. He was transcendent. Prince didn't understand the full significance of that moment until later in the song. As the guitar solo built toward its climax, as 70,000 people sang along with a unity that bordered on spiritual, Prince saw the old man's expression change. Saw him open his eyes one last time and look at the woman beside him with such profound love and gratitude that it transcended language. And then, gently, almost peacefully, the man collapsed. The woman's scream cut through even the amplified music. She caught him, lowered him to the ground, and suddenly the people around them were moving, responding, creating space. Someone was already on a phone. Security was converging. And the woman, this Rebecca Martinez, whose name Prince didn't know yet, was performing CPR with a desperate precision that suggested medical training. The music kept playing because 70,000 other people hadn't noticed. The lights, the volume, the collective focus on the stage meant that this personal tragedy was unfolding in a bubble of relative privacy despite the massive crowd. Prince kept playing because stopping would draw even more attention to the situation, would turn one family's crisis into a public spectacle. So he played through Purple Rain while watching paramedics arrive, watching them take over the CPR, watching Rebecca step back with her hands covering her mouth, her entire body shaking. And then she ran. Not away from cowardice, but toward responsibility. She ran with the paramedics as they wheeled her father toward the exit. Prince watched her disappear through the arena doors, watched the crowd fill in the empty space where tragedy had just occurred, and he finished the song with a weight in his chest that had nothing to do with the performance. After the concert, Prince asked his security to find out what happened. Carlos Martinez, 73, had died at 11:40 p.m. Cardiac arrest during Purple Rain. Prince sat in his dressing room and said quietly, "Find out who she is. I need to know her name." Over 3 months, Prince's team learned Rebecca Martinez was Carlos's only daughter, a nurse. She'd moved back to care for him after his terminal diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He'd outlived his prognosis by 20 months. Carlos had spent his last $940 on those tickets. Hidden the purchase from Rebecca because he knew she'd argue. When she found out, they'd fought. "I'm going to die," he told her. "Let me die having heard Purple Rain live one time." Rebecca had relented, had arranged for her father's oxygen equipment to be portable, had coordinated with the venue for handicapped access, had taken a rare night off from her nursing shifts. And for 90 minutes, she'd watched her father be happy in a way she hadn't seen since before the diagnosis. Watched him forget about the pain, the medications, the countdown. Until the final song. until his heart simply decided it had experienced enough beauty and could rest now. Then Prince's investigator discovered something crucial. Carlos had been a jazz pianist in the 60s and 70s, part of the same Minneapolis scene as Prince's own father. They'd never met, but they'd lived parallel lives pursuing music. Carlos had written music his whole life. Dozens of compositions in notebooks Rebecca couldn't bear to open. On concert night, he'd brought a small notebook in his jacket pocket. After he died, the hospital returned it with his effects. Rebecca looked once, saw his handwriting, and put it in a drawer. Prince's investigator had learned about the notebook through a mutual friend, someone who'd known Carlos from the old jazz scene. And this friend had mentioned something that had made Prince's chest tighten with a feeling he couldn't quite name. On the night of the concert, during one of his lucid moments while waiting for the show to start, Carlos had told the friend that he'd finally written the song he'd been trying to write his entire life. That it was in the notebook. That he was going to give it to Rebecca after the concert and tell her that his life had been complete. The music had been completed. He could rest now, but he'd died before he could tell her. The notebook had been returned with his effects, mixed in with his wallet and keys and a half-empty pack of mints. Rebecca had never opened it, never read the final song, never received the message her father had intended to leave her. Prince spent 2 months deciding if he had the right to tell her. It felt invasive. But he understood unfinished music, unspoken messages. His own father had left silences he still carried. Prince knocked 3 times. Gentle but deliberate, the kind of knock that asks for trust instead of demanding attention. Inside, Rebecca had been sitting at her kitchen table, unable to sleep, as she often couldn't these days. The anniversary of her father's death was approaching, and the insomnia always got worse during November. She'd been staring at a cup of tea that had gone cold, thinking about the concert she could barely stand to remember, when the knocking came. 3 soft impacts that somehow didn't sound threatening despite the late hour. She moved to the door more from reflex than decision, looked through the peephole, and saw a figure in a purple coat standing under her porch light. When Rebecca opened the door, the confusion on her face was immediate and complete. She recognized Prince vaguely, the way someone recognizes a face from billboards and magazine covers without having any personal connection to the person. "I'm sorry to come so late," Prince said, his voice quieter than she'd expected. "My name is Prince. I was performing at the Target Center 8 months ago when your father passed away. I saw what happened, and I need to tell you something about him that I don't think you know." Rebecca's hand tightened on the doorframe. The mention of her father, of that night, made her want to close the door, to retreat back into the numbness that had become her default state. But something in Prince's expression stopped her. Not pity, not the usual awkward sympathy people offered when they learned about her loss. Something more like understanding, like he knew what it meant to carry unfinished conversations. "May I come in?" Prince asked. "Just for a few minutes. I promise I'm not here to intrude or to make this about me. I'm here because your father left you something, and I don't think you know it exists." Rebecca stepped back, letting him enter, her mind struggling to process the surrealism of the moment. Prince walked into her small living room, looked around at the modest furniture and the photographs of Carlos that covered one wall, and then turned to face her with an intensity that made clear this wasn't a casual visit. "Your father brought a notebook with him to the concert," Prince said without preamble. "A small one, in his jacket pocket. The hospital returned it with his other belongings. Do you still have it?" Rebecca's face went pale. "How do you know about that?" "Because I've spent the last 8 months trying to understand what happened that night," Prince replied. "Trying to understand why I can't stop thinking about your father. And I found out something that I believe you need to know." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your father was a musician, jazz piano. He played the same clubs my father played in the 60s and 70s. They were part of the same scene. And on the night of the concert, your father told a friend that he'd finally written the song he'd been trying to write his entire life. That it was in that notebook, that he was going to give it to you after the show." Rebecca's legs seemed to lose strength. She sat down heavily on her couch, staring at Prince with an expression caught between disbelief and something like horror. "I never opened it," she whispered. "It's in a drawer. I didn't want to see his handwriting. Didn't want more reminders." "I know," Prince said gently, "and I'm not here to tell you what to do with it. But I am here to tell you that your father completed something that night. He finished his life's work, and he died during purple rain, which means he died in a moment of absolute beauty, surrounded by music with his daughter beside him. That's not a small thing." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, and when she spoke, her voice was raw with 8 months of suppressed grief. "He spent his last money on those tickets. I was so angry at him. I thought it was selfish. Thought he should save it for medical expenses or leave it to me. And now he's gone. And the last real conversation we had was an argument about concert tickets." Prince sat down in the chair across from her, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of personal experience that made Rebecca look up. "My father and I had complicated times," he said. "Years where we didn't speak. Things I wish I'd said differently. But I learned something after he died. The last conversation doesn't define the relationship. Your father didn't spend that money selfishly. He spent it to give you both one final perfect memory. He died happy, Rebecca. I saw his face. I was 20 feet away, looking right at him. And in those final moments of purple rain, your father was experiencing pure joy. That was his gift to you. Not the burden of watching him suffer, but the memory of watching him transcend suffering." Rebecca wiped at her tears with shaking hands. "Why did you come here? Why does this matter to you?" Prince was quiet for a long moment, considering how much truth to share. "Finally," he said, "because I've spent my entire career trying to create moments like the one your father experienced that night. Trying to make music that reaches past the surface and touches something deeper. And I watched him die during one of those moments. I watched you run after him. Watched you perform CPR. Watched you choose between staying for the end of the concert and going with your father. And I've been carrying that image for 8 months, wondering if I should have stopped the show, wondering if I should have done something different." "You did exactly what you should have done," Rebecca said with surprising firmness. "If you'd stopped, if you'd made it about him, he would have hated that. He didn't want to be pitied. He wanted to be part of something beautiful, and you gave him that." She paused, then added softly, "But you still haven't told me why you really came." Prince smiled slightly, acknowledging her perceptiveness. "Because I want you to open the notebook," he admitted. "I want you to read your father's final song. And I want you to know that his death wasn't random or meaningless. He chose the moment, in a way. He held on until he could experience that one perfect thing. And then he let go. That's not tragedy. That's completion." Rebecca stood up, moving toward the bedroom where her father's belongings remained mostly untouched. Prince waited in the living room, listening to drawers opening, hearing her soft intake of breath when she found what she was looking for. When she returned, she was holding a small leather notebook, worn at the edges, with Carlos's initials embossed on the cover. She sat back down on the couch and, with trembling fingers, opened it to the first page. The notebook was filled with musical notation, lyrics in English and Spanish, chord progressions written in Carlos's distinctive handwriting. Rebecca flipped through pages slowly, her tears falling steadily now, but silently. And then she reached the final pages, where the last song was written. The title, in careful letters at the top of the page, read, "Para mi hija." "For my daughter." Rebecca read the lyrics, her hands shaking so badly that Prince could see the pages trembling. When she finished, she looked up at him with an expression of such profound grief and gratitude mixed together that Prince felt his own eyes sting with tears. "He wrote about the concert," she whispered. "About hearing Purple Rain one last time. About being grateful for a daughter who gave him that gift. About how love is the only thing that survives death because it lives in memory and music." Prince stood up, moving to sit beside her on the couch. And for a moment, they simply shared the silence of two people who understood loss. Then Prince said something that he'd been planning to say since deciding to make this visit. "I'd like to record your father's song. Not to profit from it, not to claim credit for it, but to make sure it exists beyond that notebook, to honor what he created, and to give you a version of it that you can hear whenever you need. To remember that your father's life was complete, that his art mattered. Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. You'd do that? I'd be honored to do that, Prince replied. Your father was part of the same musical tradition that shaped me, part of the same Minneapolis jazz scene that taught me everything I know about improvisation and soul and the spiritual power of music. Recording his song isn't charity. It's paying respect to a fellow artist. Rebecca couldn't speak. She simply nodded, holding the notebook against her chest like a lifeline. Prince stood, preparing to leave, but Rebecca's voice stopped him. Wait, she said. I need to know something. That night, during Purple Rain, did my father suffer? Could you tell if he was in pain? Prince turned back to her, and his answer was immediate and certain. No, he didn't suffer. I was watching him closely because his joy was so visible, so pure. And when his heart stopped, it was like watching someone step from one room into another. Peaceful, complete. He went from experiencing beauty to becoming part of it. If there's a good way to die, your father found it. Rebecca broke down then, the grief she'd been holding for 8 months finally finding release. Prince moved back to the couch, and for the next 20 minutes, he simply sat with her while she cried. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to minimize her pain. He just offered presence, the gift of witnessing someone's grief without trying to fix it. When Rebecca finally calmed, when the tears slowed to occasional trembling breaths, Prince stood again and prepared to leave for real this time. At the door, Rebecca touched his arm. Thank you, she said simply. Not just for tonight. For giving my father that last perfect moment. For noticing him in a crowd of 70,000 people. For caring enough to come here and tell me about the notebook. Prince smiled, a genuine expression that softened the intensity he'd carried throughout the visit. Your father taught me something that night, he said. He reminded me why I make music, not for fame or money or legacy, but for moments like the one he experienced during Purple Rain. For the chance to give someone a few minutes where they forget everything except beauty. That's what art is supposed to do. Your father understood that. He lived it. And his final song, the one you just read, carries that same truth. 3 weeks later, Rebecca received a CD, Para Mi Hija, performed by Prince using Carlos's exact melody. Simple, intimate, Prince's guitar solo woven around her father's chords. She played it at his memorial service 1 year later. And as the song played, as Carlos's words about love and mortality and gratitude filled the small church, Rebecca understood something that had eluded her for 12 months. Her father hadn't died tragically. He died exactly as he'd wanted to, surrounded by music, experiencing beauty, with his daughter beside him, and his final creative work completed. The story would have remained private, except that one of Rebecca's friends, a music journalist, asked permission to write about it. The article appeared in a small Minneapolis publication, was picked up by Rolling Stone, and eventually became one of the most shared stories about Prince's hidden acts of kindness. But by then, Prince had moved on to other projects, other private missions of compassion that would never make headlines. Because for Prince, this hadn't been about publicity or image management. It had been about honoring a fellow artist, about completing a circle that death had left open, and about proving that sometimes the most powerful thing a famous person can do is notice a stranger's moment of transcendence and treat it as sacred. Rebecca Martinez still lives in Minneapolis. She never opened her father's savings account, the one he'd depleted to buy those concert tickets. Instead, she donated the remaining balance to a music education program for terminally ill patients, allowing other people to experience what her father had experienced. The redemptive power of live music in the face of death. And every year, on the anniversary of Carlos's death, she plays Para Mi Hija, and remembers the night that Prince stood on her doorstep at midnight and told her that her father's final moments hadn't been invisible after all. That's the untold story of Prince's midnight visit. A moment of private compassion that revealed what fame looks like when it's used not for self-promotion, but for honoring the beauty in ordinary lives. Carlos Martinez died in row 10, seat 17, during Purple Rain. But his death wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a legacy preserved by an artist who understood that true greatness means noticing when someone else experiences transcendence and treating that moment as holy.